like to welcome you to my Jurassic Park prop building episode. If this is your first time joining us, please allow me to extend a personal invitation to drag out your tools and raw materials and build along with us. And if you've been with us before, allow me to thank you for inviting us back for another prop building video. In this episode, we will construct the cryocan that Dennis Nedry used in the first Jurassic Park film. We'll pursue two different methods of polished aluminum finishing today, one with spray paint, the other with an airbrush. A 3D printer was used to print the can internals. If you do not have access to a 3D printer, there may be 3D print services available at your local library. There are also online 3D printing services that can print the objects for a fee. Here are some of the other tools and materials that were used to construct the cryocan: an empty aerosol can, any type of hammer and a small nail or piercing object, tin snips, an inkjet printer and some glossy sticker paper, 1.5 milliliter centrifuge vials, 120 through 400 grit sandpaper, a hobby knife and a straight edge, primer and spray paint, and a small compression spring. A list of the tools and materials can be found in the description. As always, feel free to change any of the tools, methods, and materials to construct your cryocan. Barbasol continues to make shaving cream, but the can has changed over the years. The label has been updated, and the top and bottom of the can has been tapered. Even though the can won't be used, you can pick up some Barbasol for about $1.50 and use the blue caps for the prop. Most aerosol cans have the same diameter. Check around your home for potential cryocan candidates. I had a near-empty can of CRC brake cleaner. I emptied the remnants onto a piece of cardboard and ensured it was as empty as I could make it. This is important. Try to expel all of the propellant from the can. Next, I wrapped the can in an old towel. I placed a finishing nail through some cardboard, turned the can upside down, and pierced the bottom of the can. Next, I used a manual can opener to remove the bottom. I rinsed out the can with water and dried it out. Take a break from those fumes and fire up the printer. The original label can be found for free on jpmotorpool.com. Please note it is in Adobe Illustrator format. If you have difficulty opening .ai files, check etsy.com. Periodically there is a PDF available for under $1. Once you have the label, print out a test copy in grayscale on regular paper to ensure the label fits around the can. You may need to adjust the print by a few millimeters. Tape the label on. Remember to leave the can seam visible. Using some tin snips, carefully cut off the excess. You may need to adjust your grip to achieve the right cutting angle. You can sand any sharp edges with some emery cloth. As you can see, the white sticker paper shows through, so some adjustments must be made. The top of the Barbasol can is white with a satin finish. I sanded the entire can with 320 grit sandpaper. This will help the primer bite into the surface of the can. To preserve the original seam, I covered it with a 1/4 inch strip of painter's tape. The can was primed with 2 coats of spray primer. After a few hours, I dry sanded the can with 600 grit sandpaper. Primer is porous, and the surface is metal. It may be me being overly cautious, but I chose to dry sand. The surface of the can was cleaned with a microfiber wipe with a bit of rubbing alcohol. This removed any dust and fingerprint oil. I sprayed the can with white satin spray paint. First a light mist coat, 5 minutes passed, then another light mist coat, 5 more minutes passed, and then the final coat was applied. The satin finish is a very close match to the Barbasol can. Trim the Barbasol can label with a hobby knife and a straight edge. Carefully align one edge of the label along the can seam and slowly wrap the label around the can. Place the blue caps on top and take a victory lap for completing Phase 1. Thanks to Thingiverse member Bad Wolf Props, the Cryocan internals are available for free on Thingiverse.com. Please note, the top of the cylinder does not match the screen version. It is also worth mentioning that the O-ring on the base will either need to be trimmed, or you can use Thingiverse member Coffee Headache's remixed can base, which accommodates the O-ring. He also has a more screen-accurate cylinder. With that said, Bad Wolf Props Cryocan internals are top-notch. If you enjoy the build as much as I did, please consider sending him a token of appreciation. I printed everything using PLA Plus filament at 0.12 layer height. The main cylinder and lower ring were printed with 40% infill to give the pieces that interface with the compression spring some extra strength. All other pieces were printed with 20% infill. After printing, sand all of the ridges with some 120 grit sandpaper. Fill in any gaps with your choice of filler putty. After the putty dries, sand the pieces with 220 grit sandpaper. Followed by 320 or 400 grit sandpaper. Clean the components off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol applied with a microfiber wipe. In a well-ventilated area, spray all of the components with 3 coats of filler primer. The filler primer can fill small surface flaws, but not huge gaps. Let the putty do the heavy lifting with the larger gaps. Too much filler primer makes it difficult to smooth in later steps. After the primer has cured, wet sand the objects with 320 or 400 grit sandpaper. If you still see surface flaws, hit them with more putty, sand with 220 and 320 or 400 grit, then apply another coat or two of filler primer. Repeat the wet sanding process until you have a nice even finish. If you'd like to apply your polished aluminum finish via spray paint, Rust-Oleum Metallic Finish is a nice option. It takes a little practice to get it right, and it is also very fragile, so it needs an acrylic top coat. If you don't mind sacrificing a little reflection, but want a more durable paint, consider trying Rust-Oleum Metallic Aluminum. I use this on my Tuscan Raider Gaffy stick. It has no top coat and is held up through many moisture farm raids. With your Rust-Oleum Metallic Finish spray, apply a light mist coat on the objects. This first coat will look pretty bad. Let it sit for 5 to 7 minutes, then hit it with one more slightly heavier coat. You'll see the paint level out and reveal a nice sheen. Let this paint sit for a few days and don't touch it. As previously mentioned, it is fragile and fingerprints will show up. I let it sit for about 4 days. Stand by while we quickly jump to the airbrush section. I will be using Spastix Mirror Chrome for my metallic finish. When applied as an external coat, Spastix produces a nice polished aluminum finish. I wanted the finish to be as bright as possible, so I chose gloss white as the undercoat. I applied 2 light coats of Rust-Oleum Gloss White, followed by a final wetter, heavier coat, waiting about 8 minutes between coats. I let the gloss cure for about 3 days. I then applied Spastix via airbrush at about 17 psi. It required about 3 passes to get full coverage. I let it sit for 24 hours and then lightly buffed off excess paint. Okay, the spray paint and airbrush paths have merged. We are back on track for sealing the metallic finish, no matter which paint method you used. It is highly recommended to seal the metallic paint with an acrylic finish. Both paints are very fragile and will come off after time. I applied some Pledge floor gloss with a wide synthetic flat brush. I used very thin strokes. Pledge self-levels and can cause drips if applied heavily. Work on one piece at a time and be ready to wick off any bubbles or drips with the edge of a paper towel. If it is drip-free, store the piece horizontally and let it dry for 30 minutes. A second light coat can be applied after 8 hours. Feel free to use any acrylic clear coat of your choice. It is difficult to find a quantity of 1.5 milliliter microcentrifuge tubes. You may end up with a surplus after this project. I picked some up on Amazon. I had to cut off the connector to the screw cap, It was easily removed with a hobby knife. The vials in the film appear to have black markings where the cap meets the tube. I used a Sharpie to color the tube ends. Bad Wolf Props provided the label names. I typed them up and created a downloadable PDF, which is in the description below. These labels can be printed on the same paper as the Barbasol can label. You can also use label marker tape if you have it. Once the labels are printed, carefully cut them out using a hobby knife and straight edge. Apply them to the tubes. You can use any yellowish liquid to create your dinosaur embryo juice. Beer, Mountain Dew, honey, agave sweetener, water and food coloring. Get creative. I used some Pledge floor gloss and added a drop of yellow alcohol ink that I had left over from a Jawa project. After all of those paint layers, some minor sanding was needed on the rings. I used some 120 grit sandpaper wrapped around a hobby knife to safely remove excess paint. This allowed the vials with the labels to pass through. I also needed to perform some additional sanding on the lower ring so that it could fit over the main cylinder. I drilled out a little extra room on the top ring so that the pegs from the lower ring could fit. I used a combination of CA gel and E6000 to secure the two cylinder pieces and the two rings. CA glue was placed on the plastic-to-plastic connections, and a little E6000 was used on paint-to-paint connections. Use any adhesive of your choice. I used the Bad Wolf Props can base, so I needed to trim the O-ring with a hobby knife. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I did try using a bifold door snugger spring. Although it fit perfectly, the spring was a bit too strong. I ended up using a compression string from a kit purchased on Amazon. It needed to be stretched slightly, but the tension is perfect. To prevent the top of the spring from getting caught on the 3D printed bottom ring, I used a number 10 round head screw as a topper. Help a sand trooper out and give me a like, or better yet, click the subscription button below.